So we're going to look at the learning about oral communicators and keep in mind the oral communicator and how they learn, because that's why we're learning Bible storying. So I thought, let's just break it up in the next few days and let's look at several in a row. So, all right. So if you open it up, you'll see the first one says, oral communicators do not study. Bummer. I should be an oral communicator. Too late now. That sounds very appealing. Except my memory would not do it. That's awesome. Oral communicators cannot look something up. So they don't have that great body of information that we look at. Which has its pros and its cons. So, oral communicators do not have filing cabinets or computers. I actually added the computers bit. Because that's kind of more of the current situation. Words are sounds, not letters among oral communicators. So when we become literate, we almost be able to see it in a word as opposed to just a sound, which I think is interesting. I don't think about it. I didn't even think about it until I saw this. So I was like, wow. In an oral culture, knowledge once acquired had to be constantly repeated or it would be lost. I find this fascinating because as kids, when we're little kids, I don't know if you babysat little kids or you have had kids, when they first start off, they repeat stories over and over and over again, like they want you to say the story over and over again. Have you noticed that? And I think that's part of the oral communication part in us, that when we're first, a little child, happens. And I think it's true, like so one thing that I noticed, I'm a big hiker, and when I go hiking, I notice the flowers, and I learn the flowers, and every year, it's like when I start hiking again, I'm like, oh yeah, what's that flower? And I have to, it's like if I'm not doing it regularly, I forget it. And so then when I go back, I have to kind of relearn it every year because you've had this winter season of not using that information. So it's because it's lost. Organization of information for oral communicators is very difficult. So unless they do it within a story context. So, but it's not, yeah. And then oral culture individuals look to interaction with other individuals in order to think, to remember, and to recall what was said. So within their group, they actually can recall things more. So they're using each other to springboard off each other. So any comments so far? Any thoughts coming to your head or questions so far?
It's just such a foreign concept.
It is a foreign concept. It is a foreign concept when you're so literate. Yeah. That's why this is important to look at it, because it's not our way of doing things. Okay. The personality of a typical oral communicator is more communal, relational, externalized, and less introspective than the typical literate personality. Oral communicators tend to be group-oriented. So basically, it's more about when I think about that, I think it's more about how the group is together. And actually, I'm going to say, Ukraine is more that way. When I went there, I was actually struck by how communal they are. And that's part of the reason I feel like they're rising up right now together. It's pretty incredible. Where I think Americans are very individualistic, and it's like every man for himself. And You know, those are things that we pride ourselves on, actually. So it's very different. Any comments?
I think with all the teachings that I've had on warm and cold climate cultures, I think that a lot of the people that have done that study have missed this part of why the culture is the way that it is.
Yeah, I agree. I actually feel it's kind of empty. That's interesting. I felt that too.
Well, there's also, I was reading something a while ago that, like, the more urbanized society gets, the more individualistic.
Yeah, totally.
Which just kind of brings people closer together, but their relationship wise
Right.
farther apart.
Which, that is a very interesting thing. It's almost like they need their space. And so they create their space in their head. I have all these thoughts about this. It's like they're creating their space in their head. So I had a very interesting thing that I noticed when I moved to Ukraine. So, sorry, Ukraine is a bit on my brain. But I noticed this when I moved there, and I was living there from August of 2005 to October of 2007. I wasn't there the whole time, but I ended up thinking, and at 2005, you know, that's like a while ago, and so it was, but it wasn't too. It was halfway between what is now and then, you know, like what had been like a communist state. So at that point, it was like, I think I told you the proverb that anybody that did any initiative got punished. So I remember walking around and people would not look at you in the city. They wouldn't look at you and they wouldn't talk to you. And I think what I realized was they didn't want to bring attention to themselves. And that's why I was thinking, but it was probably partly to do with that they didn't want like to draw attention to themselves, but they didn't want to bring that fear, like something that would bring punishment or whatever. But I think it was a leftover from what communist days were. So, but when you got to know someone, it was like they were like, hi, and they were just all hugs and what kind of tea do you want? And, you know, like they were just, I can even tell you like how they did it. It was just sweet. And it was like they were the warmest and most loving people ever. Reminded me of Mediterranean, like the Mediterranean cultures of just very warm, like Italian, Greek, just absolutely lovely, and very group oriented, like super, like always about that. But it was like there was this veneer, let's say, over them to keep that safety and that protection. So, and then once you got into it, then they were like loyal to the end and super, you know, embracing of you. So, yeah, anyway. So they're definitely more group oriented. So, anyway. Yeah, it kind of be fun to study it a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
I'm totally intrigued with that type of stuff. All right. Reading and writing are solitary activities.
Depends.
It does, but actually, I mean, to initiate, like, if you're reading something, you can read it and make it a group activity, but initially you're reading it by yourself, and then, you know, and then the same with writing, because it's internal processing in you, and then you're writing and doing those things. You can make them group oriented, but I think the initial part of them is more solitary. So where a story within a culture is like shared immediately, and so anyway.
Just looking back at you know, in biblical times and stuff, where reading of scripture, for example, was a key communal
Yes. absolutely out there. I agree. Which I remember, well, after I read all of these things from this learning about oral communication, I remember thinking, well, that makes it sound like oral communication is better than being a literate person, you know? And then I was like, well, actually, God's the one that instigated this. He actually instigated writing down things and keeping them. So it's not here one is better than the other. It's just understanding each other and being able to communicate across the lines. So that was something that I was kind of wrestling with before I came back down here, because I was thinking, oh man, it's like oral communicators are the best. And then I was like, well, wait a minute.
I was going to think that too, because on one hand, it doesn't seem like initially humans were written communicators or
Right, there will be oral communicators.
For lots of years. But then at some, but humans have to, so in a sense, written, or I don't know, being literate wasn't natural at first. But then at the same time, God somehow made it, like it's natural to us nowadays to write and read. And so our brain was like built with the capability for it. So it's like there's got to be some like equilibrium between them, both of them, or probably, it's possible that we lean into being literate. Not that you shouldn't be illiterate, but like we're missing out on something that oral communicators practice that we should maybe learn to practice too.
Yes, right. I think so, because I think we'll be more well-rounded, I think. All right, next one. Oral communicators create larger-than-life heroes. So the heroes become really big, you know. Can you think of any examples?
Well, judges keep in mind.
Judges? The judges. The judges, yeah. I was thinking of David. Yeah. I was thinking of David, King David, and all the people that he, warred against, and then also his mighty warriors. Like his mighty warriors were like really incredible, and and that a lot of that's oral tradition. So, anything else?
I'm just wondering how many of the Greek and
oh, right.
The heroes of
Yes.
Of their history. I'm sure that it comes from real
people.
Real people, but because they were made larger than life.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Good. Cool. For oral cultures, the cosmos is an ongoing event with man at its center. Oral communicators deal in events. What does that mean to you?
It's almost, I almost think it's like time within by events, like.
Yes. Yeah.
Just looking back at history and how they relate time and how they do things and how it's like, it was this many moons ago or this many winters or this many summers, and so that's more the event, but not necessarily like it's a lot bigger and a lot more abstract. So
That's cool. I'm actually thinking about I was telling you about the New Tribes Missions group that went into PNG and shared the story of the Bible, and they made it an event. They made this event, and every night they were talking about the events that happened, in a chronological thing, and And it was like, that's why it was so powerful, I think, because they saw that as an event, and suddenly they saw where they fit in the event. And that we hear that too with the Bible, you know, it's his story and where we fit in his story. So in some ways it's true. We get so focused on the details and the trees and where we are that we kind of compartmentalize it so much that we don't see how we're connected to the big picture. So anyway, I think that's cool. Oral communicators do not hold teachings, concepts, principles, steps in a process of techniques in their minds, waiting in that reservoir to be used appropriately. To be usable, everything that an oral communicator is expected to hear, understand, believe, and internalize must come as an event or a story, a verbal event in people's lives. So, kind of things that we've already been talking about.